done my PhD. And I've done my PhD in business administration at Florida International University in Miami. And my research interests broadly touch upon effectively modeling the human AI collaboration in knowledge intensive and virtual communities like open source software development. And I've also published in the health informatics discipline. So today I welcome you to the webinar on research design and methodologies with a focus on product management. This research is being conducted by the International Software Product Management Association in association with the IIM Bangalore. And I also serve as the program chair for the academic track at the Software Product Management Summit in March 2023. So please be sure to sign up there. And so let's start the webinar. So in this webinar, the main objective is to understand what entails research or what are the phases or levels of research activity, and then what are the available research methodologies that can actually be used to conduct research. So wherever you are in your product journey, I hope that this webinar will inform your research aspirations and your research journey. So let's start on that note. Charles Kettering, an American inventor, said this about research. He said that research means that you don't know, but you're willing to find out. So he is someone who has close to 186 patents, and this is his view. So what is research and what is a research methodology? So research is a process of discovering new knowledge. It informs action, right? Any action that is data-driven and is scientific. So research allows us or gives us an opportunity to understand what's going wrong with your problem or what can be done to solve your problem, right? So that's how important research is to any activity. And research methodology is simply a way of explaining how a researcher intends to carry out their research. So everybody comes up with innovative products. They come up with the solutions to organizational problems. And when they want to publish their findings or communicate the results, there needs to be an understanding of the research and the research methodology that goes behind the journal publications or peer-reviewed articles that you see. So for your research to be publishable, it has to follow a scientific research methodology and phases of research that we'll discuss shortly. So the main objectives of this webinar would be to learn the phases of research activity and the types of research design and methodologies that are available. So we'll broadly go over design science research, quantitative and qualitative research, as well as mixed research. And we'll also look into the frameworks that will guide our understanding of these research paradigms and allow us to conduct research in these paradigms. So let's start. So here's a broad way of looking at research methodologies. So broadly, there are other methodologies that can be included, but due to scope of time, I'm only going over the most popular and relevant ones to that of the product management discipline. So there's design science research, and then there's primary research methods, which entail quantitative, qualitative, and mixed. And then there's secondary research methods. So what is the difference between primary research and secondary research? So in primary research, you are the principal investigator who is collecting data and is analyzing the data, right? So you go on with your data collection and analysis and communication of your results by yourself. So you are the primary investigator. Whereas in secondary research methods, you are summarizing the literature that's already there. So you're not collecting any data or you're not analyzing any new data, but you're summarizing the literature or the data analysis that's already there. And that can be done in the form of systematic or analysis or meta-analysis, which I'll go over in the coming slides. So let's start with the first research paradigm, which is most relevant to that of the product management discipline, and it is called design science research. So what is design science research? Design science research has to completely do with designing new and innovative products or artifacts. So what is an artifact? Artifact is something that's man-made. It's a product, right? So it can be an algorithm, It can be a supply chain management solution, or it can be a model that you actually found that could work for an organization, right? It can be anything, any artifact or any product that's man-made, it can be considered as an artifact. And design science research allows you to generate knowledge while building artifacts. And this knowledge tells us how and why should a product be developed and designed in a particular way. So the knowledge that is generated by this research project is defined as design knowledge. And that's an important or a huge part of design science research. So you develop a product, you design a product, but what is it contributing to, or how is it contributing to any organization or any problem that you want to solve, right? So that's the design knowledge that we're talking about. And this seems like a large framework, but it's very important to understand this for you to carry out any research project, especially in design science. So in this framework, let's try to understand what's going on, what's going behind this framework. So let's focus on the central portion, which is the design part, the design component. So here it's an iterative process between build and evaluate. So a researcher builds an artifact or a product or an algorithm, and then the researcher tries to evaluate the built artifact using a variety of techniques. So it could be a case study technique, it could be experimental, it could be field study, it could be simulation. So the evaluation process takes place in the form of research methodologies that are available. And you can also see that it's iterative, right? You build an artifact, you evaluate it, you refine it further, you build it again, and again you evaluate it using techniques. So this forms the core of the design part of design science research. And then you look at the relevance cycle. So what if you come up with a design that's useful? So, but is it relevant to the environment that it should work in, right? So the environment that where an artifact actually works or functions includes many factors. So people, organization, and technology, and the characteristics of these three factors play a huge role in building your artifact and also evaluating. So you have to consider the roles and capabilities of people while you're developing an artifact for them, or their preferences towards using that product should be taken into consideration while you're building a product. In the similar way, you also look into the organizational characteristics, the structure and the culture, the scope of the project that you want to build an artifact in. Does it allow you to build up an artifact that you have in mind? In all scopes of things and all those things can come into consideration the relevance cycle, right? And then on the third, on the right hand side, you now see the rigor cycle, wherein there's a knowledge base. So you're not the first one who's doing research, correct? So there are a lot of researchers who have already done research in newer discipline. Let's take the example of product management. So there are already foundations and methodologies that researchers have used to develop artifacts in your discipline. So the foundations could be in the form of theories, frameworks, instruments, and so on. And the methodologies could be in the form of data analysis techniques, measures, validation criteria, and so on. So you as a researcher would rely on this knowledge base to actually build something new that's novel than the ones that are already existing, that's better than the ones that are already existing. And then you evaluate the artifact using this knowledge base. Similarly, you see a feedback loop right here. So here, what this feedback loop says is that the design knowledge that you are creating, so the pain points that you face, the successes and failures while building a product. So all that knowledge again is relevant or is rigorous in terms of knowledge base because it contributes to the knowledge base. So it's an iterative process. So very broadly, this is the framework that should guide a design science research project. So you should take all of these aspects or factors into consideration while coming up with a design science research project or building an artifact and evaluating it. So please let me know if you have any questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of this seminar, and we can discuss any of your questions during that time. Okay, so, and then now that we know the framework and we understand how or what factors we need to consider while coming up with a product, there is a step-by-step procedure which you can follow to actually conduct research. So I made sure, I made an attempt to include a lot of flow charts and diagrams so that you can grasp a lot of information in a short period of time. So let's start. So any research activity or any curiosity for research starts with what? A problem, right? You as researcher, it is on you to identify the problem in an effective way. And once you identify the problem, it's on you to create an awareness of your problem. Google, exploratory research, other companies who are doing similar artifacts and running into problems like you, just create an awareness of the problem that you have identified. And once you've done that, as a researcher conducts an elaborate systematic literature review. So Google Scholar, I would suggest, could be a great start for you to start with your literature review. You can use keyword analysis or keyword search and also advanced search techniques to find the desired publication. So you can find conference presentations, you can find peer-reviewed publications and journal articles in your discipline, for example, product management on Google Scholar, and that could be your starting point. So once you have your literature review, and once you looked into the research that's already been done in your discipline, now you know the artifacts that were already built to solve the problem that you're solving, right? So you face a problem and you do a literature review and you come across several other artifacts that are built to solve the same problem that you are facing. Then you understand the gaps, or if you are thinking about a design of an artifact and it can enhance the previous product, or it's a novel product altogether, then that's purely new knowledge that you're creating, right? So that's new knowledge, or that's new research that you're doing. So in this phase, you identify the previous artifacts and then identify the gaps in those artifacts and justify how your artifact is better than those. So that is what happens in the identification stage. So once you're done with this stage, you can then propose the artifact, the technology that goes into the artifact, or the algorithm that goes behind your deep learning algorithm, or the protocol that you might have modeled, or any prototype that you have built. So anything could be an artifact that you want to propose, right? So in this phase, you propose the components of the artifact, technology, architecture, and how it's built and things like that. And then you start the design phase. So you design the artifact based on the proposed components, and then you go into the development phase where you actually develop the artifact. So we've looked into the build and evaluate phase, right? So this is where the design happens, the design and development of the artifact. So once you've done with the design and development, the most important part are why scientific research is different from normal organization or industry research is the phase of evaluation. So you evaluate your artifact in a lot of major scientific phase, and that's how you gain credibility for your artifact. You can actually prove that your artifact can solve a real world problem, right? So evaluation of an artifact is the most important aspect of design science research. And there are several phases of evaluation that you can do, which I'll go over in a little bit. And for example, if you build an artifact and a major form of evaluation can be observation. So that's a research methodology. So by observing the built artifact in its natural business environment and comparing it with the previous artifact and seeing if it is actually better, that means you're evaluating your product or your artifact, correct? So that's your evaluation. And once you've built the product, designed it, developed it, and evaluated it in natural settings, then you can derive conclusions out of it, right? So you can conclude that by choosing a particular design, the design time reduced by this amount of time, or I could include these automation features in the product and it made the product better. So any of that knowledge is put together in the form of conclusions, and that adds to the knowledge base. This is where the whole contribution of your project lies. Whenever you're writing an academic paper, this is what is more important. So what are the learnings? What is the knowledge that you have contributed with your research? And then finally, you communicate your results in the form of a conference presentation or an academic paper or a research article or a seminar just like this. So that's how the design science research progresses. You start with the identification of a problem, and then you finally communicate the results using a publication. And if your research is actually generalizable, or if your artifact, if it can be used to solve similar problems, then it becomes a theory, right? That's when it gains the maximum credibility and becomes a theory. And that's the ultimate goal for any researcher, to contribute to the knowledge base, correct? So this is the DSR approach steps. And these are some of the examples of problem classes. So there are several problem classes in business research where you can build artifacts. So like you see, project management is one of the most important ones, where there is scope to build these artifacts and enhance processes and productivity of employees and the productivity of products, sales of products and whatnot. So finally, I'll talk about in the design science research paradigm, I want to talk about the importance of evaluation. So here you see that the evaluation takes place in the form of 4 phases. First evaluation, second evaluation, third evaluation, fourth evaluation in a typical design science research cycle. So as soon as you identify a problem, you evaluate it, you justify it, saying, okay, the problem is novel. There's no solution that can be found in the literature. There's no artifact that can solve this problem. So that's how you evaluate it, for feasibility, for novelty, and for importance. And once you've designed the artifact, then you evaluate it for the components it has. So is it actually new? Is it feasible to build? Is it robust enough to solve the problem, right? So that's evaluation 2. And once you instantiate, or once you're done with the artifact building, you evaluate it saying, is it easy to use? Would people really want to use my product, my algorithm, or my artifact? So that's your evaluation 3. And finally, you do an evaluation where you observe if the artifact is solving the problem it's designed for. So, and how effectively is it doing it? How efficiently is it doing it? And does it have external validation? So all that goes into evaluation 4. So for those of you who's interested in trying to understand design science research, you can check out this paper, which is a publication in business research. And you can actually see the practical utilization of the framework that we have seen, the usage of it to build a design science research academic paper. So please look into that if you're interested. And so as we are done with the design science research paradigm, now let us look into the primary research methods, quantitative and qualitative. So please note the names. So like the name suggests, quantitative means it's measurable, right? It's quantity. And then qualitative, it's very difficult to measure, but it still captures the essence of any experience. So let's understand the differences between the two. So quantitative research, data is expressed using graphs and numbers, whereas in qualitative, data is generally expressed using words. So for example, let's consider this very webinar. So once we're done with the webinar, if you receive a survey asking you to rate your experience of your webinar on a scale of 1 to 10, what is it? Quantitative, right? So it's measurable 1, 2, 3, 4 till 10. But then if there's an open-ended question which asks you, how do you describe your experience of attending a webinar? So it's all words, right? The answer would be in the form of words. So this is the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data. So in quantitative data, multiple choice questions are used to collect data. And in qualitative, open-ended research questions are used to extract data. And then the data collection methods involve surveys, experiments, and observations. Whereas qualitative collection methods involved are interviews, focus groups, as well as literature review. And then to analyze quantitative data, the numbers that you have, the millions and millions of rows that you collect, to analyze it, you would need statistical techniques, which can be supported by softwares like Excel, R, and Python. For qualitative data, because it's in the form of words and not numbers, It's analyzed using text analysis and qualitative content analysis. You can take a note of these two softwares, Deduce and NVivo, which can actually be used to analyze your data in the form of words. So those are the major differences between the two. So let's look at a framework. We've seen the design science research framework. So let's look at a framework that guides conducting the quantitative research, or the research where you collect data in the form of numbers. So every research activity starts with a problem, identification of very broad problem, and then you conduct a literature review, and then you formulate well-defined research questions. And based on the research questions and supporting literature, you can actually come up with hypotheses. You can hypothesize that, okay, so this problem gives rise to that problem. So this causes that effect. So that's your hypothesis. That's how you build your hypotheses. And once you have your hypotheses ready, you can choose a research methodology. You can choose surveys or experiments to collect data. And once you collect your data and analyze it, then that's when you can use statistical tests. There are a variety of statistical tests like t-test, ANOVA, ANCOVA, regression analysis, which can only take you 2 or 3 hours to get a grasp of, you can really understand the statistical concepts. If you can look into a YouTube video, or there are thousands of tutorials on understanding data analysis using statistical techniques. So once you're done with that, you can actually test your hypothesis. So I hypothesize that this variable causes this variable, but is it true in real life or no? We'll discuss all of these parts in a little detail in a little while. And lastly, once you do your hypothesis testing, that's when you convey results. And this is in the form of an academic paper, right? So that's when you publish academic research if you have results worthwhile sharing. So so everyone faces research problems. So I, on a daily basis, I want to carry out research about 100 different problems that I face in an everyday life, or what I see in organizations or things like that. But then how important is it to derive research questions from a research problem? So let's look into that. So let's understand a research problem using an example. So for example, a company has designed, developed and marketed, spent a huge amount of money on an innovative digital product. But the problem here is that the year-on-year sales have been consistently going down. So as a product manager, what are the different possible research questions that you can generate and that you would want to investigate, right? So this is a problem, and this is a very broad research problem that I'm taking as an example, so that will make things easier. But in scientific popular research, there are bigger things that we really work on. So let's look at the basic example. So what are the research questions that we can generate? So can we look at the customer-centric factors that affect sales? So is it the demographics of the customer? So people from 18 to 35, they like my product, they buy my product, but old ages, like people in their old age, they don't really love my product. So is it the demographics that's the factor that's changing everything, right? So marketing strategies. So how effective are the marketing strategies? Is there a relationship between the marketing strategies and the depleting sales, right? And what is the relationship between the marketing spend? Are you spending enough on marketing? Or are you spending so much that there's no customer adoption at all? So all of these questions can bring in your mind, and this is how you can actually come up with research questions from a very broad research problem. So if we are okay with the derivation of research questions like these, so they're well defined, right? You're not just thinking what's affecting sales, what's affecting sales. So marketing strategies, are they affecting sales? Or a social media presence, is that affecting sales? So that's how we are trying to delineate all your problems, and you're framing your research questions in a way that you can test them, right? So once you have your research questions, you conduct a literature review. So a literature review on what, right? So I have a research problem, I have a research question. So what do I do my literature review on? Is the most general problem that a researcher faces. So he can start with these factors. So customer-centric factors. So is there a different problem in the literature where customer-centric factors played a huge role in depleting sales? or is it playing a role? So you look into the literature of sales and you see if marketing strategies has any cause. So this is your intuition, right? With literature, you'll actually see if your intuition is correct or no, if people are or actually investigating the same relationships or no. That's where the literature review comes in. And in literature review, like I said, it's exploratory in nature. And the first point to start can be like Google Scholar, where you can search for publications in your discipline and understand the hypotheses that were already generated, which were true, which were not true. What can you learn about it? How can you model your artifact or your data analysis problem like that? So all the literature review is very important. It has to be very elaborate also. So once you're done with your literature review and you have your formulated research questions, now is the time to come up with testable hypotheses from those research questions. So what do we mean by that? So any well-informed hypothesis reflects the cause and effect relationship. So there are independent variables and then there's dependent variables. There are only two types of most important variables in any data set. So independent variables could be your marketing spend, your social media presence, your demographics, and all aspects that can cause an effect in the sales. So sales is our dependent variable. This could be a little confusing at first. So all the variables that cause an effect in another variable, that's called dependent variable, and the variables that are causing the effect are called independent variables. Let's look at an example. So we were thinking about the research question, right? So what is the relationship between marketing spend and customer adoption or sales? So based on that, I came up with an hypothesis like, so social media presence will negatively influence product sales. I'm just hypothesizing it. I'm not proving it or anything. So these are my hypotheses, and decreasing the product size will have a positive effect on sales. So as I decrease my product size, the sales will increase. That's some hypothesis that I'm coming up with based on my research problem, right? So dependent and independent variables. Like I said, a very short note to remember. So independent variables are the causes and dependent variable is the effect, which is sales. So once we know how to formulate testable hypotheses, that's when you can start collecting data, right? So in the data, where do you start it? You start with how much was the marketing spend last year? How many platforms are we active in? What is our social media presence? So all these could be your data points. Using a survey, you can have a quantitative description of trends, attitudes, and opinions. And data is collected in the form of numbers. So for example, a question could be, so how strongly do you agree with the statement? Strongly agree, strongly disagree, moderately disagree. So all of us have taken many surveys like this before. And all these survey questions are actually collecting data from you in the form of numbers, right? And once we have those numbers and have our hypothesis in place, that's when we can start answering these questions. So descriptive questions like, okay, what was the marketing spend last year? What the sales last year? What are the sales now compared to that of last year? So all of these questions can be done by basic Excel. Frequency questions you can answer using survey design, and then using advanced statistical techniques like a regression and logistic regression and things like that, you can actually answer questions about relationships between variables. So here an example could be, what is the relationship between the price of the product and the sales of the product? So is it a positive relationship or is it an inverse negative relationship, is what the research will tell us. Right? So that's survey design. And then we have experiments. So where there is a systematic manipulation of one or more variables. So you can divide a sample into two groups. One group can have treatment, the other group no treatment. And then you can compare the responses to see if the treatment is actually effective. A little more research into what an experimental design could entail you with a lot of information. And that could be really useful. And experiments can also be used to answer the same types of questions, relationships between variables, but then you can also check via groups, not just individuals, but across groups you can see if there is a relationship between variables using experimental design. So these are the quantitative research methods that we have: survey and experiments. And these are some of the, I'm just showing you the very broad criteria for choosing a test. So once you have the data, you have your hypothesis, and then you actually want to test those hypotheses, and you carry out these analysis steps. That it could be multiple regression, you could be Pearson correlation, chi-square, ANOVA, t-test, or ANCOVA. All of these tests have great tutorials online and on YouTube. And spending a 1 hour or so on each of these tests, that could really give you a lot of information that you can self do all of these using R and Excel. So please do try that. And now that we're done with the quantitative research methods, I'll briefly go over qualitative. So qualitative methods, like I said, the data is collected in the form of words and not numbers. Quality means words, quantity means numbers. So that's like the thumb rule. And using these questions, so in interviews, you can ask, so how do you describe your experience? What did you not like about the product? What did you like about the product? How can we make the product better? So all of these questions are open-ended. They're descriptive, right? So with those questions, we can answer questions as to why and how a process occurs, or why a person has constructed an attitude or a preference towards a product. So those are qualitative methods, and the data collection methods could be interviews, focus groups, case studies, documents, and audiovisual aids. So, audiovisual digital materials that you can refer to. So we'll broadly look over three most popular ones, which are interviews, focus groups, and case study. So interviews are personal interviews carried out with just one person at a time. And this is very useful because it's conversational. And whenever you're asking a question, so you can ask, okay, what do you not like about the product? You're doing a customer interview, market research, and you ask a customer, why do you not like the product? So in a survey, the person just says, I like the product or I don't like the product. But using interviews, you can actually understand what's going on behind that decision. So what do you not like about the product? So there could be probing or follow-up questions that can be very useful. And then there's focus groups, wherein there's a moderator or researcher like us, we can actually come up with a discussion wherein 6 to 10 people of the respondent sample discuss amongst themselves, and they come up with solutions to your problem. So you try to understand the challenges they're facing, the solutions to the problems they're facing, and things like that from a discussion point of view. So that's a focus group. And case study, you look into case study of a different competitor solving his product issues. So you conduct an in-depth analysis of how that other competitor or how that different organization has actually solved their problem using data analysis or research or scientific inquiry and so on. So the data collection to support a case study research can be in the form of interviews or focus groups, and even quantitative in nature. So finally, I'll go over the systematic review and meta-analysis as a secondary research method. So like I said, in these reviews, you are not the primary investigator. You as a researcher are referring to secondary data resources, and that's why it's called a secondary research method. And as part of that, what you can do is you can summarize the literature. So you find 1,000 papers or 1,000 academic publications in product management trying to solve supply chain management issues. And then you summarize all that literature at one point of time, and you derive conclusions out of it. And systematic review and meta-analysis are ways of doing those summary of large literatures that you can do. And that's secondary research techniques for you. And finally, so we look into the qualitative data analysis. So like I said, we can use statistical tests to conduct research with numbers, right? Excel or Python, you can write algorithms to analyze data and things like that. But with qualitative data, which is in the form of words, so there are like a company's website or a product has like 10,000 reviews. and you want to understand how the customer is actually feeling about the product. So how do you analyze 10,000 reviews, right? So this is where you start. So every researcher starts with raw data and then goes on to organize and prepare data for analysis. And in the first step of data analysis, the researcher reads through all data. There could be multiple researchers, 3 or 4, depending on the data volume. And once you read through all the data, that's when you code the data. So it's called coding. It's not statistical analysis for qualitative. It's called coding the data. And here you can either use any manual method of doing it or any software. Like I said, NVivo and Dedus could be great softwares to actually help you code your qualitative data. And once you code your data, what you do is you identify themes in the data. So this cluster or group of people like the product for these issues or for these reasons. So you identify themes and you describe those themes with unique descriptions. And then you interrelate these themes and form a theory. So what are the challenges that are being faced by employees at an organization? Why are the employees actually dissatisfied? Right? So dissatisfaction could be one, no monetary reward could be one, no motivation could be one. So these are all different themes that are identified in the reviews, in the 10,000 words or a million words that we look into, we identify themes. And finally, we interpret the meaning of these themes and descriptions and communicate our findings in a way as to how this problem can be solved. How can we make the product better in order that the customers will like it more? So all kinds of things can be done using qualitative data. That brings us to the end of qualitative research methods. And there's different criteria. So when can I use quantitative or when can I use qualitative? That's a huge dilemma that every researcher faces. And one has to keep in mind that the scope of the project really details or really guides the choosing of research methodology. So for example, you want to collect quantitative data, then surveys and experiments are your way to go. But then you want to collect qualitative data, then interviews and focus groups are the way to go. And one more difference between quantitative and qualitative is for quantitative, if I would need like 500 responses from people, like 500 people filling up my survey. But then with qualitative research, I only need 40 to 50 people attending my interviews because I can get a lot more information from interviews than just a survey. You see the difference? So there's pros and cons for both the research methods. And it really depends on how well you can conduct your research, how well you can answer your research question using the methodology. So, so this is the criteria for choosing a methodology. And then finally, this is more advanced. So I just want to very briefly go over what it entails. So mixed methods research is a combination of both quantitative and qualitative. So there are 3 scientific inquiry designs, phase 1 phase design, 2 phase design, and 3 phase design. So in these 3 phases, you can see that there's a combination of quantitative data collection and analysis as well as qualitative data collection and analysis. So these are the different forms in which you can conduct mixed methods research. So like I said, so very broadly, we went over the different research methodologies and the research phases. We looked into design science research. We looked into quantitative, qualitative, and mixed forms of research. So that allows me to conclude the webinar for today. So now it's time for Q&A. Please shoot your questions.
Hi, this is Vijay here.
Hello, Vijay.
Hi, thanks for a good presentation. It's a good overview of all the research methods, right? So what I understand is the initial stage starts with the quantitative methods, and then we move on to the qualitative ones to get more insights, right? That's how it pans out. Is that right?
So there's not a specific way in which you do that. So the one that you suggested, it's a mixed methods design. So it's a form of research. So you can either do quantitative, you can either do qualitative, or you can do both, which is mixed. So mixed methods research is difficult to perform because it contains both those two aspects, and but is also more credible, right? So you're achieving credibility in the form of quantitative evidence, numbers, and also qualitative evidence. So mixed methods research nowadays is gaining a lot of importance as it is more credible than quantitative and quantitative alone or qualitative alone. But
I see.
most popularly, most research is done using either quantitative or qualitative.
So when you say mixed, so what I meant is you serially do quantitative, you float a survey amongst your customer base. For example, even in the current organization which I'm working, you float a survey,
Right.
you get a sense, if you get a general sense, then probably you pick your customers in the second phase, that is qualitative, and speak to them and you get better insights. So when you say mixed, are you suggesting what we do these together, or what is it? I didn't actually get it.
So yes, so what you suggested, you can actually look it up as the second two-phase design, right? So you collected the quantitative data collection, you collected the quantitative data using surveys or whatever, and then you're identifying the results. So you have some results from the data collection, but then in order to confirm these results, you're also in phase two conducting qualitative data. So for example, in the first phase from a survey, you know that a particular customer, a customer doesn't like your product. So 60% of the customers who have taken the survey don't like the product at all, right? So that's clear with the quantitative phase. And then with the qualitative data phase, you can actually ask the customers using interviews or focus groups and ask them, so why do you not like the product? So there can be follow-up questions and probes in order for you to understand what's really happening there, right? So that's so you're complementing both these, the quantitative and qualitative. You're complementing them together in order to obtain results and interpret results in a way that you can solve the problem in a more effective manner.
Got it. Now I'll come to my actual question. This makes sense, whatever you said. So what I want to ask is, generally in the survey phase or when you collect this quantitative feedback, right? One question that commonly begs us is, did I do enough data collection, right?
Right.
So as to how do I ensure I covered enough number of participants so that my feedback I'm going to evaluate and move on to my interview stage, it's not, what do you say, doesn't have a bias, or I covered enough number of people so that I can take it to my next stage. So any tips or any
right, totally.
So
how much is enough, right?
How much is enough? So 500 is enough, or 600 is enough? How much is enough?
Right.
Is there any parameters? Absolutely. I know there is no perfect answer, but I wanted to get your sense on that.
Right. So in quantitative data, so what you do, there's some process called theoretical saturation. So you start with the interview personnel, like you start with your interviews, and then after like 30 or according to the rules of thumb, it's like 30 or 40 based on the problem that you're investigating. So after 30 or 40 interviews, you'll see patterns arising in your interviews. You'll see common reasons as to why a person doesn't like the product or why he has experienced something the way he's experienced. So you'll see clear patterns that are arising. And as the interviews go on, most importantly, every textbook, it says that there should not be a number in mind when you start with the interviews, when you start with the qualitative data collection. So
sorry,
the data collection stop when the theoretical saturation is achieved. So as soon as you realize that there's no new data that's being coming out or you're unable to extract any new data from a participant, that is when you say, or when you conclude that, okay, we have reached the theoretical saturation. That means there is no new data that can actually inform the data that's already there. So now I can stop the qualitative data collection. And for quantitative, there is a scientific procedure to do that. So you understand, I talked about variables, right? So for example, let me go back. So for example, so you want to understand the effect of marketing spend on sales. You want to understand the effect of social media presence on sales. You want to understand the presence of an automation feature on sales. So this is the general hypothesis, right? So here you can you can do something called power analysis. That's a statistical procedure. Just type on Google saying power analysis, and you'll find a calculator, statistical calculator where you can do that. So there, when you give them the number of variables that are in your data set and the number of variables that you want to analyze, if you give the calculator the number of those variables, it will actually come up with a number that's like an appropriate sample size for you.
I see.
So power analysis is the way to go for quantitative research. And for qualitative, it's a theoretical saturation that you have to establish.
Got it. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Sure. Did I answer that question?
I think you did.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, Professor. Can I go next? Akshay, this
Yes.
side.
Yes, hi.
So the question which I have is regarding, for example, if we are preparing to publish a paper, and I want to do the research. So is there a mandatory case that I need to combine primary and secondary research methods, then only it qualifies to be a new research? Or can I say even in my secondary research, if I have collected enough information, I have synthesized it in a better way than it was done earlier, can it still qualifies to be a new research paper? Or I mean, how does it go? Do we have to go with primary directly, because primary is something which we are doing new, and I understand that the research paper should contain something new as the analysis, right? Not the existing one.
But
So
absolutely, to answer your question, secondary research method is a method in itself. And there are a lot of research articles publishing systematic reviews, meta-analyses, literature reviews, and things like that. So, and they have gained huge importance in the literature as well as in the problem classes like project management, product management. In any discipline, this kind of research is very much sought out for in any discipline for that matter. So primary research methods, of course, they involve a primary investigator role and things like that and have more credibility. But then using secondary research methods, you can do great, you can actually contribute greatly to research, but because you're summarizing the literature that's already there, right?
correct.
Summarizing like 450 articles to come up with solutions to a research problem, that's great, that's amazing. And people actually look for those things. But then one thing of importance that you should know here, or that you should keep in mind here, is that there are certain standards and procedures that you have to scientifically follow to conduct a review. So I can share examples with you as to how one can conduct systematic review. So just go to Google Scholar and in the quotes, just search for systematic literature review. And you'll have loads of articles in the search results, and just go through one and you'll see that, okay, in the first phase, in just research, in search, I found 450 articles which are relevant. In the second phase, I filter those 450 articles using standard procedures, scientific procedures, in a way that I retain the information and let go of the ones that are not relevant. So that's how you keep filtering, and your sample could start with 450 papers at first. But then as you filter it down and identify the themes or quotes in each of those papers, you realize that in the end, you should only analyze like 20 papers to get the solution to your problem. You see what I'm saying? So there's a procedure, a standard procedure that's given out scientifically to conduct any of these reviews. So please follow that, and it's as good as a new research, and it has and every systematic review or literature review has its place in most of the majority of peer-reviewed journals. So yeah.
Okay, got it, Professor. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Hi, Professor. I would like to ask one question. Like while explaining about DSR,
Yes.
it was mentioned there like abductive, deductive, and inductive. I request you to please explain those terms.
So yes, these are the so types of so how do you deduce something? So these are all scientific keywords again. So for example, let's look into this loop. So you propose the artifact with the components it has, and then you design the artifact, you develop the artifact, and then you evaluate the artifact. But then you see that there's deduction happening, right? You deduce from your wrongdoings. You deduce from your wrong points. You deduce from your pain points and come up with better solutions. So it's all deductive in nature. You see what I'm saying? So you're deducing the next step out of the results from the following step. And then you're building on it again until you get the final artifact, which actually solves the problem that you're facing. So it's a build and evaluate procedure that's being done here. And that's deductive in nature. And inductive, it means so you have come up with an artifact. And then artifact knowledge, the knowledge with which you have developed an artifact is again design knowledge, right? It can actually contribute to other researchers and help other researchers in the future when they're developing artifacts like yours. So that's inductive. So you're actually inducting the research or the design knowledge into the knowledge base. So that's inductive in nature. So that's inductive here. And then abductive, you see it's a combination of deductive and inductive techniques. So you deduce and then you induce new knowledge, you deduce. So it's an iterative process. So it has both the components, and that's why it's called abductive.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions? So I guess we are done with the questions. So Dr. Spurthy, thank you so much for your very informative session. And I guess whoever is wanted to write a research paper, it's a good start. And they will be able to identify the problem first, the existing problem that they have, and then start working on that as a research case study. So we have Professor Shankardeep here, so he can share a few words. He has been in the webinar for quite some time.
Thanks. Yeah, so I would just like to thank Spurthy. So it was a wonderful presentation. It was a quite a good review and refresher for me as well. Looking at all the research, various methodologies that are there. Right. Typically, when I do research, we get into only one of them and we start digging, deeper into one of them. So sometimes, we forget the overall picture, larger picture. So this is a good, good sort of an overview, and definitely gives a lot of insights as to what are the various opportunities which are there, and how we can do various different kinds of research. And specifically coming to product management. So, and I'm glad you started within design science research and focused a lot on that. Right. That is something that is very close to product management as well, right? In fact, product managers and product management teams, they regularly use those A/B testing and those kind of, and user research is a very common theme there. So they actually do, and I see a lot of synergy that they're coming there. What they are doing as a developing an artifact, and they are doing testing on their product, right? So the same thing we can just if we can just generalize and make a theory out of it, then we get we can develop proper academic research out of industry product research work as well. So that's great. So I like the focus on design science, but overall, thank you so much for sharing this. Quite a good learning for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. So we will be looking forward for more research cases from the participants. So there might be some follow-up sessions in case there are some of the participants who have some questions on, they have started their research work and still need some help in terms of identifying the methodologies or type of research, whether it should be go for primary or secondary. So we might have a follow-up session on this, but I'm looking forward to some of you submitting your papers for the SPM Summit in the academic track. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Spurthy.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.